Do you live in an iron country or a clay country? Welcome back to the channel. Today's episode is going to give a really good illustration of the Worldview Warfighting Architecture that I created and is laid out in my book. So we're going to start with the warring parties. We're going to jump right into this. We have on one hand the kingdom of heaven, and on the other hand, the world system. So the kingdom of heaven is gonna lay out the scene for this particular analysis. Starting with spiritual warfare, the March of Empires prophecy that's in Daniel. Daniel is one of the coldest books of the Bible. I mean, it's so deep, and actually one of the pre-incarnate depictions of Christ are in Daniel, and it's very powerful. So it's a lot going on in Daniel, but we're going to focus on the March of Empires prophecy and basically Roman Empire 2.0, or as it's being called right now in late 2022, the rise of the multipolar world framework. So moving on to social governance, we're going to have the dilemma of the good ruler versus the wicked ruler. So throughout this episode, there'll be that tension. So you have time to think about, or opportunities to think about, if a particular ruler that you're being presented with, this ruler a good ruler or a wicked ruler? Is the ruler where you're from watching this video good ruler, wicked ruler? Just to define for definition's sake, the good ruler will be the ruler that executes justice amongst the weak and the poor, as well as the powerful and the wealthy. So with the psychological education aspect, it's just, you know, with all these that we hear about, the World Economic Forum, different groups vying for power, especially in the West where I'm coming from, with the changes that are happening right now, that leading into this prophecy, this multipolar situation is happening. It's changed things so much, and I think that it shows that different groups, different people have ideas about what they want to do for the future. Even me and you, we have different goals and things in life, but just like on the individual level, we're not totally in control. We can make preparations and things like that, but it's not completely up to us. The same is true on the collective level. The March of Empires prophecy basically shows that the world system itself, the trajectory of the world system itself, is not completely in control of the rulers of the world system. They're being taken by surprise on the human level, and on the superhuman level, again, they might have the knowledge or awareness, but they too are limited. So let's jump right into the world system aspect. There's a lot going on here. So we're going to start with the zeitgeist. Basically, we're going to focus on the Roman Empire. We're going to hit on the Babylonian Empire as well. And so moving forward in time, we're basically considering modern times to be in keeping with the prophecy, an extension of the Roman spirit, if you will. So that gives us the when and the where. Remember from the videos series that I produced previously, with the deeper levels, it goes into each of these 5 components that I'm about to quickly go through. I'm on the first one, which is zeitgeist. So an ideological term, there are several. They all are in the same spirit. Might makes right. Iron-fisted ruler. Okay, tyrant. Okay, authoritarian. Also, democracy is an ideological term. It comes up in this episode. These terms have baggage associated with them, and that's the whole point. Then we go down to the technique level. So again, there's 7 aspects of culture that I outlined in the book. And for this particular episode, we're going to focus on politics, religion, and economics. There's also going to be some philosophy involved. For the technology, we're going to focus on mass media technologies. For the propaganda component, what I want to do for propaganda is I want you, as you watch and you see some of the messaging that we're discussing, think about if that messaging is agitative or is it integrative? Is it gathering people around something? That would be integration. Is it causing tension between people to divide a group? That would be agitation. Then on the wicked deception, we're gonna deal with throughout this the wicked deception of utopia through empire and the apotheosis that the ruler is so often drawn to as driving this imperial march in his particular time in history. And the importance of rulers, really. I think that's why scripture tells us to pray for our rulers. There's a lot at that level that goes on. So revolution is really from a collective sense. And what that is basically the perpetuation of theft, death, and destruction. That's going to be a byline throughout this discussion. So I think I've covered everything. So let's go ahead. Thank you for watching again. Let's get this show on the road.
Here we are, Don, and for my research as we move towards our topic, I've actually spent much of today and this past week, and probably this weekend forthcoming, working on an essay, and I think appropriate to our time together here, looking at the speech of Mr. Biden in Philadelphia at the beginning of September, the so-called Dark Brandon speech, the MAGA speech that was quite peculiar that was given there, and contrasting that with a speech at the end of September that President Vladimir Putin gave upon the vote in eastern Ukraine. And there were some very interesting zingers to that.
Yes. Those are great choices. Those are 2 good ones to look at.
And yes, indeed. And there's a world of meaning I intuit between the 2 of them. And, Don, as I was watching both of those speeches earlier today, once again, I noticed the prominence of a similar logo. Mr. Biden gave the address in the Independence Hall in Philadelphia. And on the flag staffs, as we're very familiar, there's an eagle.
Right.
And when I watched the Vladimir Putin speech, on one of the flags behind him, there was the double-headed eagle, which of course goes back to Christian Byzantium, which saw itself as the second Rome. And after the Muslims took over Constantinople, Moscow began to see itself as the third Rome. And in any case, eagles, Rome. Let's talk about Rome a little bit here, Don. Rome in the past and Rome now.
All right. So when I think about Rome and its connection to current times, the thing that comes to my mind is the prophecy in Daniel concerning the dream that Nebuchadnezzar was given and that God gave Daniel the interpretation to. So in the dream, Nebuchadnezzar was shown a statue, and the statue was comprised of different metals, different parts of the body, different, sections of the body. So it started from the head, was gold, representing the Babylonian Empire, which Nebuchadnezzar was a king in at the time. Then as you proceed down the body, the chest area, I believe, the chest and the stomach, the Medo-Persians, the Assyrians. Then when you get to the groin, you've got Greece, the legs, Rome, the feet, the last empire, political or a system of social control and authority in the world. So this was the march of empires that Nebuchadnezzar was shown in the dream. So when we think about Rome, those two legs, first of all, the Greeks had a seminal influence in Roman society. Okay. Philosophy, especially, was a very strong current that continued. Greek philosophy continued into Rome, had a huge impact. Art as well, impact on Rome. So the Grecian way is there. Another thing about Rome. So in my book, I conceptualize there's seven components of culture that are fundamental for any society. Three of those are, you could say, the at the heart of every society. They are politics, economics, and religion. So with Rome, the Roman Empire, politically, they solved conflicts by violence. It's actually when you go down from the social level to the family level, the household level, it was the same thing. They solved conflicts between different households, between different tribes with violence. That was the Roman way. Another thing is dealing with economics. So one way in which archaeologists study the development of societies is they look at pottery. So archaeology in parts of Italy, modern day Italy, it is not uncommon to find huge areas of crushed pottery. This is very common because the Romans had a system of logistics that rivals what we have today. And what I mean by that is you could go from one part of the Roman Empire to another part, traveling a great distance, and you could go into a store or shop and find similar type of pottery, cups, plates, things like that people have to use every day. You could go travel days within the empire, stop at the shop, find the same type of pottery because there was this logistic system within Rome, the Roman Empire, and they had the economic engine to just mass produce items. We are very familiar with mass production today. So when we think about the Roman tradition being perpetuated into modern times, we can see that so many of the ways in which we do politics and economics today, they are in the Roman tradition. In the United States in particular, I would say that from a philosophical and religious standpoint, the United States, we follow in the Greek tradition. So I don't want to go too far afield with that, but I would just say, just look at fraternities, the Grecian flavor of those. Look at, I know in the South during the Reconstruction era, and even some before that, within the elite groups, there was a very strong Grecian kind of like revival. So philosophies like Stoicism and things like that, the elites in the South adopted those Greek philosophies and it shaped their worldviews, and they kind of considered themselves to be carrying the torch of ancient Greece into the modern times. So, but going back to Rome, we see that politically, we handle conflict by violence, even on a personal level. We live in a very violent country. It's been violent from the beginning. And that's how we deal with conflict. Economically, again, we got the mass production. Go to any Walmart, Target, whatever, find similar products in all these places. Very similar type of system structure. And what you mentioned with the eagle, double-headed, going over to the east, when the Eastern Roman Empire splits off, you have a similar type of trajectory there. So the thing about the Roman Empire is that they ruled with an iron fist. And so in the prophecy of Daniel, the legs of iron represent Rome, and then the feet, the final empire, the final system, is iron mixed with clay. So looking into, well, what is clay exactly? Well, clay has iron in it. So I'm thinking about how does this compare, or what are the things we could bring over into the human from the chemical world over to the social world? Well, what I'm thinking is there are nations in the East and the West that rule with an iron fist. There also are places, and I think they will become more evident as time goes on. There are going to be places where the governments are more malleable in the sense that the people aren't ruled over with an iron fist. So I was just thinking about our own country. Do we have a country of iron? Do we live in what could be considered today tyrannical, authoritarian type versus a more malleable contemporary word for that would be democracy? Even though I know the word tyranny, the word democracy, the word authoritarian, those are ideological terms. They come with a lot of baggage. I don't want to bring that baggage along. So I'll just say, I'll ask you, John, do you think we live in an iron country or a clay country?
As you lay it out there, I would say certainly we live in an iron country. And I talk about Greece. I seem to recall that Aristotle was under the impression that democracy would always lead to tyranny. It would always lead to, I suppose, iron. And I was also thinking, as you were saying, that how many people in my time with Apocalypse Stacy's and doing this show and some other work with the school, how many people I know that have fled America because of its oppressiveness. And that could be, not a boot on your throat so much as the economic reality that men don't have enough money to start families. They can't say things they feel like they can say. And that also would include Canadians here as well. People I know that have sought freedom in the East. They've sought freedom in places like Japan and elsewhere.
The boot on the neck, that's an interesting thing, because when the term authoritarian, the term tyrannical come up, there's usually this Hollywood type of pictures or images of people like the ruler of North Korea. And it's almost like a cartoon type of character, And I think that it really belies there's a sophistication. There can be a sophistication to this. I see this tyranny, authoritarian is a spectrum. So on one side, on one extreme, you might have that stereotypical tyrant that Africa and Asia comes to mind as being kind of marketed, the tyrant marketed in that way, in that Hollywood way. Then on the other end, though, you got something more sophisticated where you might have a situation where people just think that they have rights, but they really don't. So when it's looked at in that sense, there could be tyrannical systems in different places that are not necessarily conceptualized that way in like political writings and, mainstream media and things like that. So yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, so quite interesting. You mentioned the stereotypical dictator. This morning, I was watching the world news, and in Burkina Faso in Africa, they had another coup. It's like the third coup this year, and the guy who takes over, looks like he's out of a Schwarzenegger movie with a balaclava around the face and all the big shots with the guns. And yeah, sometimes those goofy dictators who aren't so goofy when they have guns, I suppose, and when they're in your neighborhood, but sometimes that dictator is more preferable than what we have in the West, which is a very slick type of dictatorship. I'm reminded of Frederick Douglass and his great autobiography. So he had been on a plantation, and that was like boss hog, like old school, get out there and do the work. And it was very clear what the power relationship was there. And when he was leased off by the master into the city to work in the boatyard, like I say, the overseer was kinder to him. And he actually said, to the point that we're making about tyrannies, Frederick Douglass said years later in that autobiography that he preferred the whip on his back in the plantation because at least that was honest. When he was with the guy who was chummy with him, that was unpalatable for him because everyone was playing along like they were all friends. And that's in this world order. What I'm seeing too is with the West, or the as they've rebranded themselves lately, the rules-based world order. That smiley face tyranny is more obnoxious than your dude in Burkina Faso with a balaclava on his face. Because at least he's not pretending. He's not pretending when he has the muscle men around him.
Yeah, that is manipulative. That is simplifying or trying to simplify something that's really complicated. And it's really, I think, showing with the discontent that's growing because of the economic situation. But if you could remind the listeners and the viewers when Biden got into that particular part of his speech that was really provocative, what was it that stood out to you the most?
Besides the lighting, besides a few other things of the close cropped filming, one of which is the persistent use that former Vice President Joe Biden made of the expression, "we the people." We the people. And as someone who's written 3 very, very long essays pointing this out, you and I are not the people. You and I are not the people that the US Constitution is speaking about. The US Constitution capitalizes the word P. That proper noun in legalese means a specific group of people. The US Constitution is very direct as to who the Constitution is addressing and serves, and that is the people, which is defined within the document as the signers of the US Constitution and their posterity, for us and our posterity. And we speak about the smiley face tyranny that we have in the West and that we can enjoy in the West. The persistent use of the expression, "we the people" and "our democracy" is a giant joke of anyone who's actually delved into these words and the games that attorneys play and that this system, this Babylon system, plays in its quest for power. And that was one thing that struck me, because once you understand that we, the people, and the people, I serve the people, a politician might say, are not your Tom, Dick, and Harrys on the street, but literally the bloodline families who constituted Connecticut, who constituted New York, who constituted Georgia, them and their posterity. And I can tell you, in this state of Connecticut, if you look at the families that signed the original charters, even going back before the Revolution, with when this was a colony that broke off from Massachusetts, those are the same families that are running the state of Connecticut today. And you'll see that across the board. And that's what struck me. That's a little bit more esoteric, but that once you see that, it's hard not to see it.
Wow. Okay. So a couple things there. We the people, that made me think of recently looking at some statements that were made by Thomas Jefferson when he was speaking about the media. And there was some sort of statement that he made, if I could paraphrase, like, if I had to choose between a government and no media, or no media, or media and no government, I would choose media and no government. This is what Thomas Jefferson said, because he understood the role of information in shaping thought, as opposed to government without that information tool. And he also spoke about people being able to read, and how, because the main media in his time was the printed media. So people being able to read, and how that would be a foundation for democracy. So that's what come to my mind too. And I think that, from the very beginning, the rulers of the United States have understood media. And I think that's why the United States is the best country in the world when it comes to information warfare, cognitive warfare. We're the best because from the very beginning, we had an understanding of the role of information in society, and explicitly spoken about and explicitly deliberated on by the rulers themselves, those same people that were there when the Constitution was written. So that's an excellent point you brought up. And touching on your wheelhouse, education, I think about Woodrow Wilson when he was articulating his view on education, and he was basically like, look, there's two levels to this. There's education for the elites, and there's education for everybody else. And so in that type of system, we could easily have that sort of hereditary type of structure, because those people, those kids are going to be acclimated in a completely different type of environment. America means something completely different to them than it means to everybody else. The way that, things like patriotism, all those types of things that are part of our civil religion, depending on where you are in the society, you're going to take a very different view on those things. And so those are two things that popped out to me from what you said. And then, by the way, the setting of his speech.
It wasn't just the lighting that has significance, but briefly, Philadelphia is a very occult city. It's a very occult city. And I would encourage anyone who's interested in that topic to start with the Philadelphia City Hall. I've been in and around that building, and you should look at the statuary, especially on the lower parts of the building where the public can access the subway system from there. It's very Masonic. And if you didn't get the clue, it's kitty corner. It's diagonal from the Masonic temple. But the education system, one other real clear parallel between ancient Rome and this Rome that we're in, is the class structure. In Rome, briefly, you had the patricians, who were the founding fathers. Basically, those were the bloodlines that went back to the 5th century and the original Senate and Brutus and all that stuff. And then you had the plebeians, who were the Johnny-come-latelys. They could not trace their bloodline in the city of Rome back as far as the initial independence from the Etruscans. The patricians, the blue bloods, they had a solution to what happens to monarchies and ruling classes. If you look at a lot of ruling classes from the medieval period and the early modern period, they got increasingly inbred. And what the Romans, how they avoided that situation is with the idea of the novus homo, the new man. The Romans had a system where literally new blood could come into the ruling class. Cicero is a famous example of that. If you look at the American system, we actually do have almost an exact analog to that, and that's called the Ivy League system. The purpose of the Ivy Leagues, because you brought up, Don, the role of education in this system, the purpose of the Ivy Leagues is to act as a vetting mechanism for people who will marry into the big families in this country and the people, the bloodline families who attend these schools. And it's a way to vet new blood and to vet also people who think from other social groups outside of. That's why groups like Yale, which is 40 miles away here, it's not very far at all. That's why Yale will have people, you'll have all these scholarships because they're trying to draw new people into the bloodline pool with new ideas but new genetics too, so they don't become these inbred castes that history has shown plenty of. The last point that I wanted to bring up to follow up on Don's earlier great breakdown is on the media. And I have noticed, especially during the COVID shenanigans, a certain pattern that emerged, and it just clicked to me. I was teaching Rome a couple semesters ago, so I was in that neck of the woods. What we're looking at here is a model that was used in the Roman army, and this is a manipular formation by a guy called Camillus, so they're called the Camillan Reforms. And they stuck with the Camillan Reforms all the way through Augustus, so for several hundred years. And I think even Augustus kept this aspect of the Roman army. But the point is, for here, the media, okay, to make that point out, look at the 4 ranks here. You start at the bottom, that's going to be the front rank when the army, the legion's coming at you. You have your veletes, so those are dudes in their underwear that are just throwing rocks or javelins, slings. Then you got the 3 groups of Roman citizens behind them. So the hastati, they would have just basically light javelins and light swords. Then the principes, those were your main backbone of the army. And then you had the triarii. Hopefully, by the time you got to the principes, the battle was over. You wouldn't have to. But if you did, the expression that the Romans had was fall back on the triarii. The triarii were the rock. They weren't going to budge. And so what you had, and we're going to talk about the media here, what you had in the Roman system is this organization, and you can see it in this illustration, the same aspect, where basically the first 3 ranks, starting from the lower right, the guys that are all in one line, and then the velites and the hastati, basically these dudes would just be rotating in and out, right? And while you were fighting and expending energy. But when you were rotated back out, you could catch your breath, have a few Gatorades, stretch a little bit, and then you would eventually replace the men now who were tired, and then they would be taking a break. Don, what do you think the barbarians were doing the whole time?
I think that if they didn't have this system, they would just get worn out.
Bingo. And that is what is happening with the media in this society. We can have fun, and more than fun, as to try to make out what would be the light infantry, the medium infantry, and the heavy infantry in the media. But if you look at how COVID was done, which is, I think, a textbook example of this situation being enacted. Because remember, as Don's well aware of, the idea of fifth generation warfare is primarily not kinetic or physical. It's primarily information warfare and narrative warfare. But it's the same principle that an army legion on the ground 2,000 years ago had, which is what? What is warfare? You're moving the will of another through various means. At the end of the day, that will could be moved with a sword, or could be moved with a dude on CNN, but it's the same objective, is to move the will of the opponent.
Exactly.
But so I'm going to have fun here, right? We'll say that our front line of light infantry, those are your Twitter, Twitter people. Those are your social media. You see them all the time. Then the next rank, they're going to be your network news, right? Your local news. They're going to be maybe minor celebrities, or people who have more of an enduring level of presence in the society, maybe famous scientists or whatever. And then after that, you move into the heavy hitters. People who have high civil office and so forth. Yeah, and then I would actually say that would be your triadi. That would be the attorneys and the bankers. Those are the guys who the whole system lives to serve them, and they're not going to break for their system. It is, in fact, as they say, our democracy, and they're not going to let anything threaten that. And they just rotate.
But that's the thing, because, like I said, our country is so good at psychological warfare. Like, we've mastered it and distilled it down to a level to where it's just like, for me as a person that likes to analyze this kind of thing, it's just amazing to see how they're able to sway perception so masterfully, man. It's really, if it wasn't so disturbing and insidious.
It's a shame that it's not used for the good. It's really a shame that it's so abused in so many ways. Communication media, that is.
Man, I just want to thank you for this conversation. It's always stimulating. We always come up with something that's like, hey, we got to keep it going. I love that. So thanks again, John, for speaking with me. And check out John's work dealing with education, apostases. It's really a very unique type of project that he has, and I think a lot of people can learn from it.
Yeah, thank you for that, Don. I appreciate that those kind words there. We're going to have to rebuild all of this when this order comes down. Stay in limber shape, you and I, and the lot of us. Because we're going to have to rebuild. We have a lot of work to do, and that's all I have to say there.